this episode, we are stepping back from the individual frameworks, standards, and legal rules to review the governance foundations and legal duties that matter most when you are trying to understand artificial intelligence, AI, in a disciplined way. By this point, you have heard about risk management, documentation, human oversight, transparency, model-level obligations, international principles, and management system thinking. And now the goal is to pull those threads together into one clearer picture. For a brand new learner, this kind of review is important because AI governance can start to feel like a crowded room full of similar-sounding terms, each competing for attention. The real learning happens when you stop hearing them as separate vocabulary items and start hearing how they connect. A strong governance professional does not just memorize that a law mentions risk or that a framework mentions accountability. A strong governance professional understands which ideas keep showing up again and again, why they keep showing up, and how they shape the way responsible organizations build, deploy, monitor, and change AI systems over time. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. One of the most important governance foundations is that AI should never be treated as a purely technical matter. It may involve models, data, infrastructure, and software engineering, but the governance challenge is much broader because AI systems influence people, processes, institutions, and decisions. A system can affect who gets hired, who gets flagged for review, who receives attention, what information someone sees, how a decision is framed, or how much trust a user places in an automated output. That means governance must connect technical understanding with legal responsibility, operational discipline, organizational accountability, and real-world consequence. This is why governance is not owned by engineering alone and not owned by legal alone. The most durable programs bring together product teams, operations, compliance functions, privacy staff, risk leaders, security professionals, and business decision makers so that the system can be governed as something that lives in the world rather than as something that exists only in a development environment. If you remember that one idea clearly, many later duties start making more sense. A second foundation is that context matters at least as much as capability. People often become distracted by what a model can do in general and forget to ask what the organization is actually using it to do in a specific setting. That is a serious mistake in governance. A summarization tool used for low-stakes internal productivity is not governed the same way as a system that helps shape employment decisions, student interventions, access to benefits, or public-facing information. The same technical capability can create very different risks depending on who is affected, what the system influences, how much autonomy it has, and what the consequences of error look like in practice. This is why use case definition is so central. Before an organization argues about performance, oversight, or control design, it has to be able to describe the business context, the intended purpose, the stakeholders, the likely harms, and the role the output plays in human judgment. If that context is vague, the governance around it will usually be vague as well, and vague governance fails quickly when pressure, incidents, or scrutiny arrive. A third foundation is the lifecycle view. Good AI governance does not begin at launch, and it does not end at launch. It starts when a use case is first proposed, continues through design, data selection, testing, deployment, monitoring, updates, and retirement, and it adjusts as the system changes or as new information becomes available. This lifecycle mindset matters because many AI risks are not visible at the beginning. Some emerge when the system reaches a new population, when people rely on it more than expected, when business incentives change, or when a model is repurposed for a task it was not originally meant to support. A governance program that focuses only on approval before release is therefore incomplete. The organization also needs post-deployment review, monitoring, change control, incident response, and a process for reevaluating risk when context shifts. One of the most common themes across governance frameworks and legal duties is that evidence and accountability must continue after the system enters use. That is how organizations move from one-time compliance theater to a more mature practice of ongoing governance. Risk management is one of the clearest legal and governance duties to remember because it sits at the center of almost every serious framework. But it is important to hear risk management correctly. It is not just a list of possible bad things, and it is not a dramatic meeting held once so a team can say it completed the risk step. In AI governance, risk management means identifying known and reasonably foreseeable harms, understanding who could be affected, estimating severity and likelihood in context, deciding what controls or design changes are needed, and continuing to review those decisions as the system evolves. It also means distinguishing between a risk to the organization and a risk created by the organization's AI use. Those are related but not identical. A model that exposes a company to regulatory trouble is one kind of problem, but a model that harms a person's opportunities, privacy, safety, or dignity is another kind, and good governance must be able to see both. The legal lesson here is that a responsible organization does not wait for harm to become obvious before it starts managing risk with discipline. Documentation is another duty that keeps appearing because modern AI governance depends heavily on evidence. An organization needs to be able to explain what the system is for, what version is in use, what data and methods shaped it, what assumptions guided its design, what testing was performed, what limitations are known, what controls were selected, and what role humans are expected to play around it. That explanation cannot live only in someone's memory or inside informal conversations. It has to be written down in a way that can be reviewed, updated, and used by people who were not present for the original decisions. This is why documentation is more than a bureaucratic burden. It is the structured story of the system and the reasoning behind key choices. When documentation is current, specific, and connected to reality, it supports accountability and learning. When it is stale or incomplete, it becomes a warning sign that the organization may not truly understand or govern what it has built. Many legal duties rely on documentation because law cannot evaluate responsible practice if no evidence exists to show what the organization actually did. Record keeping and traceability are closely related, but they add another layer that beginners should not miss. Documentation explains how the system was designed and what the organization intended. Records show what actually happened over time. That includes logs, approvals, test results, change histories, incident reports, override decisions, retraining events, complaints, and other pieces of operational evidence. This distinction matters because a well-written design document does not prove that the deployed system behaved as expected or that the organization responded responsibly when problems emerged. Record keeping supports traceability, which is the ability to reconstruct important events later and understand who did what, when, and why. That kind of traceability is valuable for regulators, but it is just as valuable for the organization itself when it needs to investigate failures, challenge overly optimistic claims, or learn from near misses. One of the strongest recurring lessons in AI law is that responsible use must remain legible after the fact. If the evidence disappears too quickly or was never created in the first place, accountability weakens immediately. Human oversight is another duty that matters because it addresses a central problem in AI use. People often trust systems more than they should, especially when the outputs look objective, efficient, or mathematically precise. Real oversight is not satisfied simply because a human is somewhere in the loop. It depends on whether the person involved has enough understanding, authority, time, and institutional support to question the output, investigate anomalies, and intervene when needed. A reviewer who is expected to approve hundreds of system-generated outcomes without context is not exercising meaningful oversight. That person is performing a ritual around automation. Good governance therefore asks who is responsible for oversight, what they need to know about the system, what warning signs they should recognize, how they can escalate concerns, and when they are empowered to override the system rather than defer to it. Legal duties around oversight are trying to prevent organizations from using humans as decorative compliance symbols. The deeper goal is to keep human judgment alive in situations where automated outputs could shape important decisions or create substantial harm. Transparency and notification duties sit beside oversight because people cannot govern what they do not understand, and should not be silently exposed to AI in certain contexts without knowing it. Transparency in governance does not always mean explaining every inner technical detail of a model. More often, it means giving the right people enough meaningful information to understand purpose, capabilities, limitations, expected performance, and appropriate use. That includes information for internal users, downstream providers, compliance reviewers, and in some cases the individuals who interact with or are affected by the system. Notification duties become especially important when people are directly interacting with AI, when synthetic content is being created or manipulated, or when systems involving sensitive forms of analysis are in operation. The core idea is that organizations should not rely on confusion or invisibility to make AI adoption easier. Trustworthy governance depends on people being informed in ways that are timely, clear, and relevant to the decision or experience in front of them. Notice by itself is not enough, but without notice, accountability becomes weaker and manipulation becomes easier. Another governance foundation that matters greatly is role clarity across the value chain. One lesson that appears repeatedly in law is that responsibility depends on what an actor does, not just what it calls itself. A provider that develops or places a system on the market carries different duties than a deployer using the system in a live setting. An importer bringing a system into a jurisdiction and a distributor making it available further along the supply chain may have their own verification and correction duties as well. At the same time, roles can shift when an organization materially changes a system, changes its intended purpose, or places its own name on something created by another party. This matters because governance failures often happen in the gaps between organizations. One actor assumes another actor handled the risk, the documentation, or the review, and the result is a system with weak accountability at precisely the point where decisions matter. Good governance closes those gaps by being explicit about who owns which duties, who must be informed when trouble appears, and who has the authority to correct, suspend, or withdraw problematic use. Management system thinking is also one of the governance foundations most likely to matter because it is what turns principles into operational discipline. A governance program becomes stronger when it includes policies, defined roles, review procedures, testing expectations, documentation rules, escalation paths, training requirements, monitoring routines, and continual improvement. Without that structure, even organizations with good intentions tend to govern AI inconsistently. One team documents carefully, another does not. One business unit performs impact review, another assumes the project is too small to justify the work. One leader wants human oversight, another treats the output as automatically trustworthy because it saves time. A management system approach reduces that inconsistency by making governance part of the organization's normal operating model. This does not mean every AI use case receives the same level of process, but it does mean the organization has a repeatable way to decide what level of review, testing, and control is needed. That repeatability is one of the strongest signs that governance has matured beyond isolated acts of caution into a real institutional capability. Impact awareness is another legal and governance idea that keeps showing up because AI systems can produce harms that are not captured by traditional product thinking alone. A system may function as intended and still create unfairness, exclusion, manipulation, chilling effects, dependence, or other forms of social and organizational harm. That is why governance increasingly asks organizations to look not only at technical performance, but also at how a system affects individuals, groups, and society. This broader view changes the questions teams ask. Instead of focusing only on whether the model works, they also ask for whom it works less well, whose opportunities it may shape, what forms of misuse are foreseeable, how human behavior may shift around the system, and whether certain people will bear more of the burden when things go wrong. This is one reason impact assessments and stakeholder awareness matter so much. Governance becomes more realistic when it recognizes that harm does not have to look like a spectacular system crash. Sometimes the most important harms are quieter, cumulative, and embedded in routine decision-making. A final legal duty that deserves special attention is the duty to respond, adapt, and correct. Good governance is not proven by claiming that a system was designed responsibly at the beginning. It is proven when an organization notices new risks, investigates incidents, updates documentation, adjusts controls, retrains staff, changes the workflow, or even suspends use if the system is no longer behaving in an acceptable way. This responsiveness is central to trustworthy AI because real environments change and evidence can overturn earlier assumptions. An organization that refuses to revisit its decisions is not practicing governance. It is defending a past decision even after reality has moved on. This is why post-market monitoring, incident handling, corrective action, and continual improvement matter so much in both legal and standards-based approaches. They are all expressions of the same deeper idea. Responsibility does not end when the system is released. Responsibility continues as long as the system continues to influence people, decisions, and outcomes. As you review all of these governance foundations and legal duties together, the most useful way to remember them is not as separate boxes, but as one connected operating model. Context defines what the system is doing and why it matters. Risk management identifies harms and drives controls. Documentation explains the system and its reasoning. Record-keeping preserves what actually happened. Human oversight keeps judgment alive. Transparency and notification make use and exposure more understandable. Role clarity assigns responsibility across the value chain. Management system thinking creates repeatable discipline. Impact awareness broadens the view beyond narrow performance. Ongoing response and improvement keep the program honest after launch. That is the larger pattern behind the episode title. The governance foundations and legal duties most likely to matter are the ones that keep appearing because they answer the same enduring question from different angles. Can this organization show that it uses AI with structure, evidence, accountability, and respect for the people affected by it?
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.